The stranger heard it before he saw it. The sound carried clean across the street, sharp and flat, the sound of an open hand hitting a woman's face. It cut through the afternoon like a crack of dry wood, and every sound around it stopped. The piano inside the saloon stopped. The blacksmith's hammer stopped. Even the wind seemed to pull back and hold still. He was sitting on a bench outside the barber shop with his hat low and his legs stretched out, one boot crossed over the other, eating an apple he'd bought from a boy at the edge of town. Scout was tied at the rail 2 doors down, standing hip-shot in the sun, half asleep. The horse's head snapped up before the stranger moved. Scout's ears locked forward and his weight shifted to his front legs. The horse knew what that sound meant. The stranger turned his head slowly. Across the street, on the boardwalk in front of the general store, a woman was stumbling backward with her hand pressed to her face. She was young, maybe 30, wearing a dress that had been mended so many times the patches had patches. 2 children stood right beside her, pressed close against her side. A boy maybe 6 and a girl maybe 4. They weren't crying, they were past crying. Their faces had the blank stillness of children who had seen this before and had learned that making noise made it worse. The man who hit her was still standing over her with his hand open. Big, heavy across the shoulders, wearing a gun belt that sat too high on his waist. Behind him, 3 more men stood close together on the boardwalk, watching the woman the way men watch something they don't consider human. "I said the rent's due Tuesday, Mrs. Hollis." The big man's voice was loud enough for the whole street to hear. He wanted the street to hear. "Mr. Suttner don't like waiting." The woman straightened up. She took her hand away from her face, and there was a red mark spreading across her cheek, and her lip was split at the corner. She didn't wipe the blood. "I paid last month. I paid every month. Receipts don't mean what you think they mean, Mrs. Hollis. Not anymore." The stranger set the apple down on the bench. He didn't stand up. He watched. The street was empty except for people watching from inside doorways and through window glass, the way people watch when they're afraid to be seen watching. The big man reached for the woman's arm. She pulled back and he grabbed her wrist, and the little girl made a sound, not a scream, just a small, sharp breath like something had broken inside her. The boy stepped in front of his mother with his fists clenched at his sides and his chin up and his whole body trembling. The stranger stood up. He didn't rush. He stepped off the boardwalk into the street and walked toward them at the same pace a man walks to check on a horse, unhurried. His poncho moved with each step, and the gun belt underneath was visible for a moment, then covered, then visible again. He stopped at the edge of the boardwalk. He didn't step up onto it. He stood in the street looking up at the 5 of them, the 4 men and the woman with blood on her chin, and he spoke quietly enough that they had to lean forward to hear him. "You finished?" The big man looked at him, then looked at the poncho, then looked at the 3 men behind him, checking the math. 4 to 1. The kind of arithmetic that made men brave when they shouldn't be. "This ain't your business, stranger." "Wasn't. Is now." "You don't know what this is about." "I know what I just saw." The big man smiled. Comfortable odds for a man who was used to hitting women. "Walk away. This is between Mrs. Hollis and Mr. Suttner." "I don't see Mr. Suttner. I see 4 men and a woman with blood on her face and 2 children who shouldn't have to watch this. So I'm going to ask you once. Walk away from her." The one who'd been smiling stopped smiling. The other 2 shifted their weight. The big man's hand drifted toward his belt, not fast, just testing, seeing if the stranger would flinch. The stranger didn't flinch. He didn't move at all. He stood in the dust with his arms loose at his sides and his eyes on the big man's hand, and waited with the patience of a man who had done this math before and already knew the answer. The big man's hand stopped. Something in the stranger's stillness had spoken louder than words. The 4 men backed off the boardwalk, not running, just creating space, and walked south down the street without turning around. The big man was last. He pointed at the woman. "Tuesday, Mrs. Hollis." The woman sat down on the boardwalk step like her legs had stopped working. The boy was still standing with his fists up. The stranger knelt down and said, "You can stand down, son. You did good." The boy's fists opened slowly and he sat down next to his mother. The little girl crawled into her mother's lap. "Thank you," the woman said. Her voice was flat, tired. "But you've made it worse." "How so?" "They'll come back. They always come back. And next time there'll be more. And you'll be gone, and we'll still be here." "Who's Suttner?" "Suttner owns the town. Has for about 18 months. He came with money and a lawyer named Fry and started buying properties. When people wouldn't sell, Fry found reasons they had to. Liens, back taxes, survey disputes. Always paper, always legal, always wrong." She wiped the blood from her chin. "My husband owned the general store. Built it himself in '83. We had the deed free and clear. Then Suttner's men came with a document saying we owed 3 years of back taxes. We didn't owe a cent. Henry went to the county office in Abilene to fight it. He was gone 4 days. Came back with a letter from the county clerk saying the taxes were valid. Henry said the clerk wouldn't look him in the eye. Where's Henry now? Her face changed. The expression of a woman who'd already processed the worst thing and was living in the empty space on the other side of it. Henry went back to argue. 3 of Suttner's men met him on the road. They said his horse threw him. Henry had been riding since he was 5 years old. And the store? Suttner owns it now. Fry filed the papers the week after the funeral. We live in the back room. Suttner charges us rent to live in the building my husband built with his own hands. The stranger counted doorways up and down the street. How many men does Suttner have? 14, maybe 15. And the law? Sheriff Briggs. He was here before Suttner. Good man. Was. Suttner pays him now. He doesn't come out of his office much anymore. Those receipts you mentioned, you still have them? Every one. And Henry's deed? She looked at him carefully. It's in a tin box under the floorboards. Henry hid it before he went to Abilene the last time. He told me not to show it to anyone unless I was sure. Are you sure? I watched you stand in front of 4 men for a woman you'd never met. I'm sure enough. He walked the town through the afternoon with Scout loose behind him. The horse read the place alongside him. Scout stopped outside the sheriff's office and blew air through his nose and shook his head, the motion he made when something smelled wrong. Through the window, a man sat behind a desk with a bottle in front of him, and the posture of a man who had given up on himself. The livery was full, 14 horses. Her count was right. The livery owner was an old man named Pruitt, who'd kept a log of every horse that came through his stable for 20 years. Dates, brands, owners. He kept it because his father had kept one, and his grandfather before that. Suttner's men started arriving about 18 months ago, Pruitt said. First 3, then more. Always paid in cash. You still have those logs? Every page. Mrs. Hollis pried up a floorboard in the back room and pulled out a tin box with a blue lid. The lid had a small dent on one corner, the kind made by a child's shoe, and Mrs. Hollis touched it when she pulled the box free, like she was touching something that belonged to a different life. Inside was the deed. Hollis General Merchandise. Lot 14, Block 3, Township of Calder. Filed 1883. Clean. Legal. The ink was faded, but the signatures were clear, and the territorial stamp was intact. Underneath the deed were the receipts. Every rent payment she'd made, dated and signed by the man who collected them. She'd kept them in order, monthly, not a single one missing. And underneath the receipts were Henry's letters. Letters to the county clerk. Letters to a lawyer in Abilene who never wrote back. Letters to his wife written from the road, careful letters in that same neat hand, describing exactly what he'd found at the county office, which records had been altered, which clerks wouldn't meet his eyes, which pages in the register had been rewritten in a different hand. Henry Hollis had done what careful men do. He'd written everything down, he'd dated everything, he'd named everyone, and then he'd hidden it all in a tin box with a blue lid under the floor of the store he built, because he understood that the truth is only useful if it survives the man who found it. The stranger read the letters at the small table while the children slept. When he finished, he closed the tin box. Your husband found the same pattern I've seen before. Suttner uses Fry to manufacture paper, back taxes, survey disputes, liens against property that's been free and clear for years. The clerk in Abilene validates whatever Fry files because Suttner is paying him. When families fight back, things happen on the road. How many families? From what I can see, at least 8. Her hands went still on the table. 8 families. There were rules on the frontier, not the kind written in law books. Older than that. When a man built a store with his own hands and filed a deed with his own name, that paper was more than paper. It was a promise between a man and the ground he stood on. You didn't touch a man's land. You didn't threaten his family. You paid what you owed, and the line between what was yours and what wasn't was sacred. There were consequences for breaking those rules. Real consequences. The code. The unwritten code that governed everything beyond the reach of judges and marshals. How debts were really settled. How land was really protected. What happened to men who broke the rules that every man on the frontier already knew? It's called the Code of the West. It's in the pinned comment. He worked through the night. The barkeep at the Long Branch was a quiet man named Darnell, who poured drinks and remembered everything. Suttner, bragging about the county clerk, $400. Cheap for an entire county's land records. Fry telling one of Suttner's men that the Pemberton filing was the cleanest forgery he'd ever produced. There was a school teacher named Clara Walsh who had kept something nobody asked her to keep. Attendance records. Every child who stopped showing up. Every family that left. Dates and names going back 18 months. A quiet record of a town being emptied one family at a time. She kept it because she was a teacher, and teachers count heads, and when the heads stop showing up, you write it down. The stranger cross-referenced Clara Walsh's records with Pruitt's livery logs and Henry's letters and the rent receipts. The pattern was clean enough to be drawn with a ruler. Family after family, the same sequence. Fry files paper. Family fights. Men show up. Something happens on the road. Family leaves. Suttner takes the property. He sent 2 telegrams from the relay station 4 miles east, one to the Federal Land Commission, one to the U.S. Marshal's office in Dallas. Names, dates, property descriptions, and the amount paid to the county clerk. He was back before dawn. He found Briggs at the sheriff's office at first light. The bottle was still on the desk. The man behind it looked like he hadn't slept in months, the hollowed-out face of a man living with something he couldn't swallow and couldn't spit out. The stranger sat down across from him and put Henry Hollis's letters on the desk, one at a time, without speaking. Then Clara Walsh's attendance records, then Pruitt's logs, then the rent receipts with Suttner's own men's signatures. Briggs read them all. It took a long time. When he was done, he put his hands flat on the desk and stared at them. "I know," the stranger said. "You don't know anything about me. I know you went to Henry's funeral. I know you stood in the back. I know you left before anyone could see your face. And I know you've been sitting in this office with that bottle trying to figure out how to live with what you let happen." Briggs closed his eyes. The stranger let him sit with it. The clock on the wall ticked, and somewhere outside a dog barked once and then went quiet. "The Federal Marshal's office has everything I just showed you. You can be the sheriff who helped Suttner or the sheriff who helped stop him. But you decide now, not tomorrow, not next week, now." Briggs opened his eyes. He looked at the bottle on the desk. Then he picked it up and set it on the floor beside the wall, carefully, like he was putting something away for good. He pulled a deputy's star from the drawer and set it on the desk. "What do you need?" They started with the men who had families. 4 of them. The pitch was simple. Federal telegrams sent. County clerk named. Anyone still standing with Suttner when the marshals arrive goes down as an accessory. That's not a threat. That's arithmetic. All 4 were gone by mid-morning. 10 men left. And Fry. And Suttner. The stranger found Fry at the land office, eating breakfast at his desk, napkin tucked into his collar, eggs on a china plate. Everything about him was neat and organized. His files were labeled. His desk was clean. His forgeries were meticulous. The county clerk in Abilene is going to be arrested. His name is in a federal wire, along with every amount he received and every filing he validated for you. Your signature is on 8 property transfers that the Federal Land Commission is about to review. You can go down with Suttner, or you can open every cabinet and show me what's real and what isn't." Fry set his fork down. He dabbed his mouth with the napkin. He looked at the stranger with the expression of a man rapidly recalculating his position. "I want immunity. I'm not a lawman. I can't give you immunity. But the man who cooperates first gets treated different than the man who cooperates last." Fry opened the cabinets. 8 families, 8 sets of manufactured liens, forged surveys, falsified tax records. The stranger laid them on the desk beside the real deeds and the real filings. And when you put them side by side, the forgeries were obvious. Fry was meticulous, but he wasn't careful. There's a difference. Meticulous men make clean copies. Careful men make sure the copies can't be found. 6 more of Suttner's men left during the morning. They saw Fry carrying boxes out of the land office. They saw Briggs wearing his badge again, standing straight. They did the math. 4 men left. And Suttner. The stranger walked to the general store. He took the padlock off the front door and opened it wide. Sunlight poured into the space for the first time in months, and the dust in the air caught the light and hung there like the room was remembering what it used to be. Mrs. Hollis walked through the store slowly, touching the shelves her husband had built. The counter he'd sanded smooth, the scale he'd mounted by the register and leveled with a carpenter's care. Her hand stopped on the counter and she pressed her palm flat against the wood and held it there. And the stranger looked away because some things aren't meant to be watched. The boy followed her and found a broom leaning in the corner and started sweeping without being told. Corner to corner. The way he'd watched his father do it 100 times. Horses on the South Road. Suttner was coming up the street on a gray horse with 4 men riding behind him. Suttner was a lean man with a narrow face and clothing that didn't belong in this town. A tailored coat, polished boots, a hat that had never seen dust until he rode into this territory and decided to own it. He stopped in the middle of the street. "You've cost me a great deal of time today." "I have." "Do you know what I paid for this town?" "I know what you stole from it." Suttner dismounted. His 4 men stayed mounted. 2 of them were sitting loose in their saddles, reins held light, ready to ride in any direction. "Mrs. Hollis owes me rent." "Mrs. Hollis doesn't owe you a thing. Her husband built that store. He filed that deed. Your lawyer manufactured a lien and your clerk validated it, and a federal marshal is going to explain to you how that works. One man, you're one man. I am, but your lawyer's already opened his cabinets. Your clerk is named in a federal wire. Briggs is wearing his badge. 10 of your men are gone. And those 4, he nodded toward the mounted men, 2 of them are about to leave. You can see it in how they're sitting. One of the loose riders looked at the other. Then he turned his horse and rode east without a word. The other followed. 2 men left. Suttner's hands curled into fists and uncurled and curled again. 2 men, Mr. Suttner. You came with money and a lawyer and 15 men and paper that said you owned everything. The money bought a clerk. The lawyer's talking. The men are gone. And the paper was never real. The last 2 dismounted. They took off their gun belts and set them in the dirt and walked toward the livery. Suttner stood alone in the street. A lean man in a tailored coat with polished boots turning white with dust. No men. No lawyer. No forged surveys to hide behind. Just a man who had bought a town and was watching it buy itself back. One truth at a time. Behind the stranger, people were coming out. Darnell stepped onto the boardwalk. Clara Walsh stood in the schoolhouse doorway. Pruitt came out of the livery, wiping his hands. Briggs walked out of the sheriff's office and stood on the boardwalk with his badge catching the light, standing the way he used to stand, the way he'd forgotten he could. And Mrs. Hollis came out of the general store with her children beside her. The boy was holding the broom. The girl was holding a jar of penny candy she'd found behind the counter, gripping it with both hands like it was the most precious thing she'd ever touched. You have until the federal men arrive, the stranger said. That's more mercy than you showed Henry Hollis on that road. Suttner mounted his horse and rode south. The tailored coat was covered in dust by the time he reached the edge of town. The stranger watched him go and knew the way a man knows weather that Suttner would keep riding. Men who built on paper always ran when the paper burned. They had nothing underneath it. The street filled with people who'd been behind doors for 18 months, blinking in the sunlight like they were seeing their own town for the first time. Mrs. Hollis walked up to the stranger. The boy was beside her. The girl had opened the candy jar and was eating a peppermint stick with a solemnity that only a 4-year-old could manage. Will you stay for supper? I appreciate it, but I'll be heading north. The boy looked up. Why? The stranger looked at the boy. The boy who'd stepped in front of his mother with his fists up when he was half the size of the man who hit her. The boy who'd found a broom and started sweeping before anyone told him to because that's what his father would have done, and he knew it without being told. Because your mama doesn't need me anymore. And somewhere north of here, someone does. He tipped his hat to Mrs. Hollis and walked to the rail where Scout was waiting. The horse turned north before the stranger was fully in the saddle, the way he always did, reading the road ahead and choosing the pace on his own. That easy trot that covered miles without announcing them. The boy stood in the street holding the broom and watching until the stranger was just a dark shape on the ridge, poncho moving in the wind, getting smaller and smaller against the wide open sky. Then he turned and went back inside the store and started sweeping again, the same way his father used to sweep it, corner to corner, every board. Clara Walsh was already writing letters. 8 families, 8 addresses, if she could find them. Come home, bring your deeds, the real ones. Some towns die and nobody notices. Some towns get saved by noise and gunfire and the stories get told wrong for 100 years. But some towns get saved the quiet way, with a tin box under a floorboard, and a man who didn't walk away when a woman with blood on her face told him it was hopeless. I'll see you on the road. And the code the stranger carries, the one Henry Hollis lived by, the one he was teaching his son without ever sitting him down to teach it, the one that said you stand up even when you're shaking, and you sweep the floor even when nobody tells you to. That's in the pinned comment.